Hey, it's Lou, and here's the thing. The Chinese government is waging class warfare. Government officials have been forcing tens of thousands of people out of their homes into Beijing's freezing winter, sometimes violently, and then knocking down their homes, just completely demolishing them. These people were given just days to prepare for their evictions. That's why thousands of newly homeless people are dragging around garbage bags full of their possessions. And that's why Beijing looks like an apocalyptic version of the future. At first glance, these demolitions actually make a little bit of sense. On November 18th, a fire broke out in an impoverished neighborhood in Beijing. 19 people died, 8 others were injured. And the government has claimed it needs to prevent further tragedies by just wiping out at-risk structures. City officials have identified over 25,000 buildings earmarked for destruction within a 40-day period. Perhaps that seems reasonable, super fast, perhaps rushed, but a reasonable response to perceived fire hazards. However, you need to consider China's shameful history of abuse towards the people who live in the suddenly and suspiciously uninhabitable buildings. By and large, they are migrant workers from rural provinces in China.
Critics accuse the government of using that fire as an excuse to force hundreds of thousands of poor migrants out of the city and back to where they came from.
These people have provided the back-breaking labor, particularly in construction and food services, that has transformed China from a mostly rural country to a country with 6 of the world's 31 megacities. These migrants have long been exploited. According to a Human Rights Watch study, they are very poorly paid, sometimes even unpaid. They have to contend with dangerous and often deadly work environments. They aren't offered insurance or basic social services, and they live in inadequate housing. So inadequate is the housing, in fact, that 1 million of these migrants literally live underground. They are dubbed the rat tribe. Now, if you're an American and you hear about low-paid workers who take menial, unwanted jobs in cities, you might think of Mexican migrants in the US. Or if you're from Dubai, that might bring to mind Pakistani or Indian workers, foreign workers who are seen as disposable and are treated as such, treated deplorably. But here's one big difference. These migrant workers in China are Chinese. This is their country. However, because they're from rural areas, they're treated like second-class citizens. It's practically written into the law. Because in China, there's this registration system called hukou. Everyone has a hukou designation, and the designation is connected to a certain region. It's not where you were born, it's actually inherited at birth. Your hukou designation allows you certain benefits in the region it's associated with. So if you have a Beijing hukou, which is very desirable, you get to use Beijing's best hospitals, you're more likely to get into good schools, you'll have access to better public housing. But if your hukou is connected to a rural area, you don't get those rights in Beijing or other big cities like Shanghai. And that's the thing with these migrant workers. They don't have an urban, big city hukou. And that's part of the reason they live in slums and receive poor medical care and can't send their kids to good schools.
And it seems to me like a deeply discriminatory system.
This is a huge problem in China.
Now, there is a really twisted Orwellian Black Mirror Twilight Zone part of the hukou. It is actually possible to switch your registration to a different, more desirable region. But if you want to move to a big city, your ability to do so is linked to a score the government gives you.
We'd need you around a 4.5. 4.5.
This score is connected to your education, your skill set, whether or not you got traffic tickets, whether or not you violated the one-child policy, how much you've paid in taxes, whether or not you are a good citizen. So through this scoring system, Beijing and other Chinese megacities can attract the best and the brightest from anywhere in the country. And these desirable, talented people get to move into the good housing. But the folks who do the menial work that makes the cities run, the food deliverers, the maintenance crews, the people who cook and clean and watch after people's kids, they have to live on the fringes, where buildings are vulnerable to fires and they are vulnerable to sketchy, if not arbitrary, evictions. And this is nothing new. Since 1949, over 45 million Chinese people have been relocated, including 1.5 million people in Beijing who were moved to make room for the 2008 Olympics.
They never notify us before they come to destroy our houses. They just show up with police and city management officials. They hire thugs to surround us and use water cannons to force us out.
The compensation for being displaced was often laughable, not even enough to cover local utility bills. And a variety of studies demonstrate many of the displaced are worse off after being moved and struggle with extreme poverty. And now add those tens of thousands of recently evicted to that number, to that situation. Yeah, the government claims they're providing assistance, but It's certainly not enough, and many people on the ground say it's non-existent. But perhaps there's a silver lining. The wealthy and the middle class in China, who've long tolerated and in fact benefited from the exploitation of migrant workers, are starting to criticize the government for its class-based discrimination. Chinese social media is filled with outrage, and intellectuals and professors wrote an open letter condemning the evictions. That type of dissent is a rare and risky move in authoritarian China. And even a state-controlled website published an editorial criticizing the actions of the government. Pretty ballsy. And many people in Beijing are actually opening up their homes to the displaced. So perhaps change is coming. We could only hope, because a fire is a tragedy, but forced homelessness by the government is an outrage. All right, that's the show this week. I'm gonna go live my life.